The sun was a thin disk slowly descending over the horizon, casting the training grounds in a shimmering haze of amber and long shadows. The dusty square on the outskirts of the village was mostly empty now, with most of the students and trainers having had the good sense to go home to enjoy a well-deserved supper and prepare for sleep, but she did her best to avoid sleep now. Vesper jumped back, every muscle straining as she sucked in her stomach to avoid a vicious jab from Keyhind's blunted training spear. Stumbling awkwardly, she twisted and turned trying to recover her balance while at the same time trying to avoid the tall man's long reach and relentless attacks. Seeing that Vesper was barely keeping to her feet, he changed tactics, whipping the long weapon low in wide circles, trying to knock her feet from under her. Thinking quickly, Vesper shifted her weight onto her back foot and parried the wild attack, spinning her own spear like a whirlwind to deflect the long weapon. Then seeing an opening, she charged forward, forcing Keyhind on his heels with a series of quick feints aimed at his head. Undeterred, he danced back, neck and shoulders swaying like a cobra so that Vesper only caught air with her strikes. "Am I too handsome?" said Keyhind with a smile, lazily knocking Vesper's spear wide before coming in again, attacking high and then low with a series of blindingly fast jabs with the spear. Vesper growled, ducking low to avoid a swing and then retreated to avoid losing her head. "You have the face of an oxen, so you have little to lose." She laughed, goading him on while conserving her own strength, hoping to beat him by wearing him out. Keyhind and his men were on abo, warriors and protectors rarely seen in the village. Men who spent most of their time scouting the wilds around the village for threats and keeping those working the fields safe, a task they had failed on that fateful night so many months ago. They had found Vesper near dawn, draped over her aunt's body, shielding it from a pack of wild dogs that had been sniffing at the smell of dead flesh, hungrily circling in closer with every moment that passed. The tall, wiry man had fallen to his knees in despair when he realized who Vesper was protecting, and why, cursing himself and his men at what had happened. He had promised then and there that he would never fail her or their people again, that he would do everything in his power to protect and to train her to the best of his ability. True to his word, they had begun training the very next day. While Vesper had expected to learn about Ace and the nature of power, about the things her aunt had started teaching, Keyhind knew nothing of those things, so he taught her what he knew: the spear and shield, sword and fist. "Pay attention," he snapped, stopping his blunt spear only a hair's breadth from her face. "Sorry, Molimu," she said, cursing at herself, angry that she had become lost in thought, leaving herself open. With a deft twist of her spear she knocked the other weapon aside, crouching once again to the starting position she knew so well. It won't happen again. The tall, wiry man stood to his full height, waving her off. "You call me teacher, but I am not sure if I am actually teaching you anything," he began, speaking slowly, like a man who rarely spoke. "One moment you fight better than any on Abo I have ever seen, and I would be honored to have you among my men, and the next you behave as the young girl you are, barely able to hold your spear." Vesper let the spear fall to her side, pressing her lips together in a thin line. "I just get tired, Molimu," she lied, not able to meet his gaze. How could she possibly explain that every thrust, every strike came from stolen knowledge? How could she explain the Loe imprisoned in her soul? To make matters worse, the more time that passed, the more her mother's memories faded. Already her understanding of Ace had faded to a distant memory, and Vesper had to learn what she could through trial and error, often with disastrous results. Just last week she had set part of the villa on fire while making her supper, and this morning, while attempting to jump from her home to the village, she overshot, ending up deep in the wheat fields, unable to draw on any power for fear of what she would do to the crops if she took their energy. In the end she was forced to walk, grumbling under her breath at her stupidity. Fighting was easier, though, as long as she didn't think too much, her body simply reacted, moving by reflex. "This I understand," said Keyhind, turning down his lips while nodding to himself. "This is why we train, so that the body has the will to defy its limits. Take some time, drink some water, and we will continue." "Vesper, are you all right?" Keyhind rushed to her side as a shooting pain shot through her skull, gasps of agony pouring from her throat. As if just thinking about her called the Loe, Lilith attacked the walls of her prison, her titanic blows growing with each passing moment, sending jagged spikes of hurt through Vesper's skull. "I'm fine," she said with a shuddering breath, leaning against Keyhind, grateful for his strong presence. "Perhaps we've pushed too hard today," he said, holding her up. "You are only human, no matter what your abilities." "I think yes, that might help," said Vesper, using all of her will to hold shut the door to Lilith's prison. The Loe had been silent for the last few months, so much so that Vesper had let her guard down, hardly noticing that she was there anymore. But now her mother saw an opportunity and was doing everything she could to break free. Using Keyhind's arm to steady herself, Vesper shifted her vision, following the glowing threads of power that flowed in all directions. With a deep breath she drew on the well of power that flowed from the low bushes and shrubs that were scattered around the training area, using the vegetation's life force to reinforce the barrier of Lilith's prison, once again muting her to a distant buzz. "Come, I will take you home," said Keyhind, taking her training spear and hooping it through a sling on his back. "And I will make sure that you eat this time. And go to sleep." "The nightmares come when I sleep," she said, shivering despite the heat. "I can get a few hours here and there, but I end up waking in a cold sweat each time, terrified and alone in the dark." Keyhind shook his head, his long, grey braids falling over his face. The old warrior knew some of what had happened that night, but not all of it, and Vesper didn't care to tell her tale fully. If she were honest with herself, she wanted nothing more than to leave what had happened in the past and never talk about it again. "I know it is your family home, but you should not be in that house by yourself," he said as they sat down the road in the flickering twilight. "I'll be fine," said Vesper. "My father has promised to return and spend the winter. It will be better with him here and not at the Emperor's side. Your father spends too much time coddling that old man. With Magda gone, he should be here with you. With us." Vesper smiled to herself, memories of a young, strong Marcus Aurelius in the bath fluttering through her head. It was strange, Lilith's memories of her time with the Emperor were the strongest, often coming to the surface without warning. "That old man is wise and kind. He is lucky to have my father, but my father is lucky to have him. They make an excellent team, and the Empire thrives under his rule." "How could you know such things?" asked the tall warrior, frowning down at her. She looked away quickly, her eyes focusing on the fading remnants of the setting sun. She had to be careful. Her mother's memories of the Emperor often floated to the forefront of her mind at the strangest times, and even without knowing the man, she had a strange affection for him, with the thought of him now making her blush. "My father talks of him when he comes home. And I have read letters he sent to me, his words were always kind." "Romans are good for nothing," spat Keyhind, regardless of their station. With a laugh she leaned against his wiry frame, comforted by his presence while they walked on in silence. They were almost back to the villa when Vesper tensed, knowing something was wrong. "No one is supposed to be here," she said, pushing away from him. "Could it be Sandaway?" she said, an odd mix of anger and fear bubbling up from her stomach. "No," Sandaway aren't much for riding, and there are horses around back. They don't seem to be trying to hide. Perhaps your father has returned. Vesper nodded, the tension draining out of her shoulders as she strode with purpose to her home. Coming closer, a small contingent of men appeared from her aunt's garden, each of them wearing the silver armor of the Legion, the tall plumes from their helmets making them appear taller than they were. Roman legionaries, said Keyhind, a predatory grin coming to his face. Not the usual auxiliary fools we normally see. I have always wanted to try my hand against such men. To see if they live up to their reputation. We're about to find out, said Vesper as one of the legionaries broke from the group, cantering on a tall horse to meet them. He came to a stop before them, holding tight his reins to control his horse who danced about nervously. I am 1st Centurion Atticus, and my men and I have been ordered to escort you. Vesper frowned up at the centurion in confusion, trying to make sense of his words. Escort me where? She said at last, backing away from the nervous horse. The 1st Centurion frowned at her, clearly not used to having his words questioned. By ancient treaty as old as the Empire, you have been ordered to fulfill your sacred duty and serve as the Emperor's hand. She shook her head in confusion, glancing over at the dozen or so men who appeared behind the 1st Centurion guiding a smaller horse that was clearly meant for her. I'm afraid you've made some sort of mistake, she began, trying to keep her voice calm. My father serves as hand to Marcus Aurelius. I am far too. Your father has been arrested for treason, he said, raising his chin. Treason? For what? Shouted Vesper, feeling like she'd just been struck by lightning. For the murder of the Emperor, for the death of Marcus Aurelius. Vesper heard his words and staggered back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. What she was hearing was impossible. Her father was not capable of such things. He was a loyal servant even to the point of putting the good of the empire before that of his own family. He is to be executed ad gladium as part of the games to celebrate the new emperor. Games. New emperor, said Vesper, shaking off her stupor. Who has been named? It was the will of the emperor that his son rule, and so it has been done. Commodus rules, she whispered as the blood rushed from her head.